Nelson Kawamedish here. I've been asked several times to share my technique of weaving that I do. So that's what this video is about. When we're done, we'll post it onto our Sacred Ways website on Facebook. So weaving is something that the Tainos have been known to do. It's been documented by Christopher Columbus and all of the early chroniclers, the excellent weaving that Tainos did. There's very little available in terms of their technique that they used. We do know that they did finger weaving, but in terms of a loom, that's a little bit unclear. There is an Arawak loom that I've been researching, and I'm trying to get more information on that. But for today, I'll share the technique that I used. When I first got started with weaving, it was a backstrap technique, and very little equipment was needed. I would just tie off the weaving from my belt to a stationary object like this pole. In fact, many of the first weaving projects that I did were done right here off of this post here in my living room. And the idea was, you would just weave, and as the weaving was done, you would just tuck it further into the belt and tie it off. This is a good way to get started. Again, very little equipment is needed. You don't need a loom or anything like that. But there are some drawbacks to this technique. When you weave, let me come here and I can show you. When you weave, you get twisting that happens on the back half of the project that you're working on. So I started a little weaving here, but I just want to show you how these central strands have started to develop some twisting. Now, if you're weaving a pattern where you create a twist and then go the other way to undo the twist, that's not a problem with the technique that I just showed you. And if we come here, I can show you some of the designs. So this is a design that I did right from that post, and it basically, you go in one way and then you go in the opposite way. So any twist that develops gets undone, and you can continue that forever. This is a fairly long piece, and I've done 12-foot long belts like this from a stationary object. This is another design where you're weaving a pattern, and then here's where you turn and you see the mirror image. I turned it again here. So these kind of patterns are fine using that technique. But once you get into more complicated designs, such as this, letters, again, letters, animals, and complicated pieces like this, that technique no longer works. And that's where I had to come up with a different system. So what I've done is I created this board where the back half of the weaving is not tied to anything right now. It's hanging off, and I use 3-ounce lead weights to keep tension on the yarn. These are called the warp strands. I did have to drill out the hole to make it wider for the yarn to go through if I'm working with thicker yarn. And these hang here. I had a smaller loom that I started out with, and the problem with the smaller loom is that it was flush with this board, and as the weaving would come to an end, these weights were hitting the table. So I created this board. You see that it's cantilevered, hanging off the side of the table. So now I can weave, and these weights will come all the way up to the top. And let me just come over here. And what this allows me to do is, every once in a while, as the twist develops, I can take one of these strings, one of the warp threads, work it to the end here, take it off the nail, and the weight spins, untwisting, and I lay it back, and I can continue weaving. So that's one benefit of this type of a setup. The other thing that I was doing was, on this end, I would use a clamp like this, and as the weaving was done, I would just, release it and re-clamp. The problem with the clamp is that it's not even tension. You have these notches in here, and the weaving project would warp. Another drawback to this, obviously, is you can only weave something as thick as this clamp. So I decided to tie off to a bar So this way the tension is always constant. And what this allows me to do is, as the weaving progresses, I just take this whole piece and move it over. And so as you see, what I've done is I've taken nails every 2 inches, and as the weaving gets done, I just pull this bar down, 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 down. And for longer pieces, I've even put nails on the bottom of this table and up along the back. And this serves most of my purposes. I've actually, and then over here you'll see that because there's a lot of weight, these 3 ounces do add up quite a bit depending on how wide of a project you're working with. This is only 22 warp threads wide, but I've done things 100 warp threads wide, so that's 100 of these 3-ounce weights. So I use these regular weights just to hold the table down so it doesn't shift on me. I've started to outgrow even this setup. I want to do wider projects. The other problem with this setup is the nails are quite close to each other. That's fine for this material, but when I use regular yarn, this is a little bit too close. So I'm going to create a board that's maybe 3 to 4 feet wide, and the nails are slightly more spaced apart. With that, then I can do large panel pieces like this one here that I have designed and ready to go. This is over 200 warp threads across. Okay, so we'll stop here for a second and then I'll set up and show you the weaving. Bye-bye.